The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Powermatic and Type-On.
So if you've followed me for a while, you probably know that my family and I are into gaming, whether it's video games or board games, honestly mostly video games these days, but we like classic board games too. And a lot of the games we play involve dice, and sometimes many dice. The kids are not real good at it, so they kind of shake them up and throw them across the room. So Nicole asked me if I could make a dice tower. Now, if you've never seen one of these, this is not something I've invented. This is a fairly common design where you drop the dice into it, it hits off of a couple of ramps that shakes up the dice, and then you have a lid or a tray that contains them. So check this out. Right? And this way you don't have them going all over the place. And when you're done playing, you simply fold this guy up like so, drop it in. You could even put dice inside there and it won't go anywhere because there's no escape holes. And I actually made 3 of them, one of zebra wood, one in maple, and one in a spalted maple. Now, if you want to build one of these bad boys, we've got a plan for you and measurements, and you can consider this a starting point because there's a lot of variations. Just Google it. You'll find a lot of different versions of these dice towers, and some of them get pretty complicated. If you're really a stickler about randomization of dice, you may want to add more obstacles in there. You maybe make the ramps a little bit steeper. And I also have to mention there are companies that make these if you just want to buy one. Wormwood is a good example. They have a cool magnetic one that just looks absolutely beautiful. But you want to make your own, this is a pretty good way to do it, at least as a starting point. And I want to mention really quick, this is the first project we're doing with my new shop helper. His name's John, so you might see his hands or his face, I don't know, at some point during this build, but let's give him a warm welcome. All right, let's get to it. Most of the parts of the tower and lid will come from 1/4 inch stock. I don't usually buy anything less than 3/4 of an inch, so I'll resaw material from thicker boards. A quick pass at the jointer gives me a nice square corner for resawing. I cut the pieces a little bit thick in case the blade does anything dumb, and I can rejoint the faces and plane the pieces down to final dimension. Mine ended up a little bit thicker than 1/4 inch, which is perfectly fine. Now everything is still oversized in length and width. Now for some bevel cuts. Let's crank the saw to 45 degrees. The tower pieces get a bevel on one edge, the fence is then adjusted to the appropriate width and the second edge is beveled. Now we can cut the tower pieces to length. If you want a taller tower, cut them longer. The internal ramps are now cut to a width that fits right inside the tower. We need 2 ramps, and I can get them both from this one piece. With the saw beveled at 45 again, I'll make the cuts. And I almost forgot that one of the tower pieces, the front specifically, needs to be trimmed a little bit shorter. This is where the dice come out. We'll take a minute to sand all of the parts that we can't reach after assembly, and then it's time to glue up. The glue up could be really difficult if we don't employ a few tricks. First, I'll use a piece of scrap as a straight edge that I can use to align my pieces. With the bevels facing down, I'll tape the pieces together edge to edge. I usually use blue tape for this, but I'm trying something new. This strap tape stuff, we'll see if it works any better. Spoiler alert, it doesn't! It tends to leave a sticky residue, so I won't be using it again. Now we can flip the whole thing over and apply the glue. I'll quickly double check the orientation and placement of the ramps, and then the glue goes on. Pay attention to the order of my pieces and their placement. It's pretty easy to mess this up. The top ramp is just eyeballed about a ½ inch from the top of the tower. The bottom ramp needs to be flush with the bottom of the tower. Now here's the cool part. We can start folding this thing together, locking everything in place with a couple more pieces of tape. Check the box for square and nudge the ramps to close up any gaps, though they're pretty tricky to move around at this point. If you need to close any exterior gaps or coerce the tower into square, you could strategically use clamps here and there. But don't get too nuts with the clamps because you can easily collapse this thing if you're not careful. Give it a good amount of time to dry before you remove the tape. Now we need to cut our tray sides and back to the proper height, which should be flush with our tower when it lays down inside the tray. While we have the numbers in the plan, it's best to get this information from the workpieces. Stack the tower on top of the bottom panel, and bring a side piece up against it. Mark a line at the top of the tower, and now all we need to do is add the distance that we want our tray panel to be up from the bottom of the tray. In my case, that's 3/16 of an inch. Now we can rip the side and back stock to width. At the chop saw, I'll cut the back piece first, and then the two side panels. Some of these pieces are so short that it's best to keep them coupled for as long as possible with another workpiece. As for the tray front piece, that gets ripped to 1.5 inches wide. I'm using a folded piece of sandpaper to give my push stick a little bit more grip, otherwise this would be a dicey maneuver. Get it? Dicey? Now for the panel groove. This will be done in 2 cuts at the table saw. I actually made my life difficult by cutting the groove while referencing from the top. It's best to set the fence 3/16 of an inch away from the blade and start cutting the groove that way. That allows you to reference from the bottom of your pieces, and you can do the sides, the back, and the front all at the same time with the same setup. Now for the bevels. The front and back need to be beveled and cut to the same length. Hold the pieces against your tower and cut them so that they're about 1/16 of an inch too long. This gives us room for our flocking later. And if your flocking doesn't take up a little room, you might not be doing it right. The tray sides are cut to length using the same logic as the front and back. Now the sides get a strong taper. Measure up about 1.25 inches at the front and 1 inch in from the back and connect those points. We'll make the cuts at the bandsaw and then smooth with the disc sander, though you could certainly use a block plane or a sanding block. Now to cut the tray panel. Mark the exact size of the tower on the oversized piece and then add 1/4 inch to each dimension to account for the 1/8 inch deep grooves. Now we can cut it to final size. Assembling the tray is similar to the tower. I'll use blue tape this time though. What's nice about blue tape is it not only doesn't leave residue, but it also has a little bit of give and stretch to it, which allows me to stretch it over the joint, and that helps apply pressure when we fold it up. I actually forgot to here, but be sure to add some glue to that groove for the panel. If the panel gets glued in, the whole thing becomes a lot stronger. As usual, remove the glue once it starts to set up. At the front, you should notice the taper of the sides doesn't jive with the squared edge of the front. Use a block plane and some sanding to fix that. Voila! Now the whole tray gets a nice sanding, rounding over all of the sharp edges. Before applying the flocking material in the tray, we need to seal the wood. If you skip this step, the wood can absorb the flocking adhesive unevenly and cause unsightly patches. So we'll seal the inside while also applying our actual finish coats to the outside. I'm just using satin rattle can lacquer. And even though I'm spraying outside, I'm using a respirator because safety first, suckers! After a few coats, I let the finish cure for a bit and then apply a barrier of blue tape around the perimeter. This will keep the flocking adhesive off of our finished sides. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let's talk about flocking. This is John's first project in my shop, and I honestly don't typically flock in the first week, but sometimes you just hit it off, the mood is right, and you take the afternoon to flock around. Hashtag no regrets. The first step is to paint on the adhesive. The adhesive is sold in colors that complement the flocking fiber, so you get a more consistent appearance. You want to brush this stuff on as smooth and consistent as possible, and once coated, we'll use the applicator to apply the fibers. It's basically 2 cardboard tubes, one fits inside the other, with the fibers at the bottom and a few holes at the other end. The air pressure blows the fibers out onto the work. It's kind of like making fresh ground pepper. Pepper? I'm using a big plastic bin to help catch the oversprayed fibers so that we can collect them and reuse them later. And by the way, you should wear a respirator during this process. You don't want to breathe in those fibers. Remember, always wear protection when flocking. Once the adhesive is completely covered, move the tray around a bit so you can see it from different vantage points, looking for any shiny spots. And keep hitting those areas with fibers until it's an even, matte appearance. Now you can shake off the excess and let it dry overnight. The next day, you can tap out any remaining fibers and then carefully vacuum out any loose material. Now we can give the tower its final sanding and give the edges a little round over. You'll want to test the fit and keep sanding the surfaces until the tower slips in without too much friction. Finally, we can apply the same lacquer that we used before with 3 to 4 coats. After a couple of coats, I sand the surface lightly with 320 and then apply the final coat. That's about all that's needed for a quick and dirty finish job like this. The fit you're looking for is something like this: snug, but not so tight that it digs into the flocking.
All right, so let's give it its first test run. Daddy needs a new pair of chisels. All right, it works. You can sit here and actually look at all the results and see how often they repeat themselves, but it's random enough for my purposes. Remember, you could always add complexity to further the randomization there. Now, I've got 3 of these. I only need 1. I think I'm going to give the other 2 to a couple of D&D podcasting friends of ours. I think they would really enjoy them. And the only thing left for me to do is take this in, show it to the family, and see if we can't get some kind of a game going. With my magic powers and the power of my staff, I'm going to roll 2 6s. Yes! I'll smite you all!